Shalom from the holy city of Tzfat in the Galilee in North Israel. Today, the 20th day of the month of Tammuz of the year 5783, corresponding to the 9th of July of the year 2023. And I've chosen to speak about the book of Iyov, the book of Job, during this period of the 3 weeks Bein HaMetzorim, because across the world, most people are in a very somber mood. Many people suffering from afflictions that have been unknown for, in many cases, at all in their lives or for several generations. And in view of the great pain that so many are feeling across the world, let us turn today to this most extraordinary and unique work, the book of Job, Sefer Iyov, which stands as part of the so-called wisdom literature, the Ketuvim, the holy writings, one of those 3 works which contain such profound wisdom, known by the acronym of Emet, Aleph, Mem, Taf, Aleph, Iyov, Mem, Mishlei, Proverbs, and Taf, Tehillim. And in particular, the book of Job is so completely unique because it is more than any other work in the whole of the books of the Tanakh, a completely universal work. The 5 books of Moses are all about Israel and the quest of Israel to come to the promised land and to bring about the perfect society that will bring about the perfect world. And so all of the books of the early prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, trace the course of the very tragic history of Israel going astray in the land after idolatry until they were expelled from the land. And likewise, all of the books of the later prophets of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 so-called minor prophets, the shorter prophets, are all essentially about Israel, God's chosen people, upon whom the destiny of the entire world really depends. Now, the book of Job is so completely different because none of the characters are prima facie on the surface Israelites at all from the children of Israel. Job himself is a figure that is absolutely swathed in mystery. In the Talmud, where the book of Job is discussed in the tractate of Baba Basra on Daf Tesvov Amud Beis, that's page 15 on the B side of the page, there are no less than 8 identifications of the possible time frame in which Job was living. From the very early days of the Tanakh, from the days before the Israelites even left Egypt, until some theories quite later. And who exactly was the author of this book is also a great mystery. In my personal opinion, following the majestic Hebrew of this work, the chiseled, carved in eternity, I can think of no other soul that would have been the vehicle for this work than the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. And indeed, the world view, the view of existence of Job is one that comes from the very center of the Torah perspective, and yet it is all phrased in the mouths of persons that are not manifestly either Jewish or Israelite. In fact, I think both the authorship and the identification of Job historically both are completely irrelevant questions, because what is really important to anybody who is truly in search of wisdom and understanding of the world in which we live is really going to be focused mostly in the text. And for most people, particularly for people who do not have the access to the original Hebrew text, together with the commentaries of the Torah sages, the text of Job is particularly impenetrable. Now, it's impossible in the context of a three-part series to discuss the entire book of Job in any detail. And what I plan to do in this three-part series is to discuss, firstly, the answers to Job that are given by his three interlocutors, the three friends who arrive when he is depicted in the depths of his misery, and one by one they address him and are not able to give him any solace. Well, these occupy the major part of the earlier part of the book, as I will be explaining presently. And none of these answers satisfies Job, who by the little past the midway point of the book is actually left without anybody to talk to him, because they all believe that he's not listening to anybody. So we have one of the most exalted passages of the Tanakh in the central chapters of Book of Job, where Job, Eov himself, sets forth his case, what he is, and indeed only when we come to this part of the book and we get a sense of who was this outstanding, righteous individual, this prophet of the nations, only when we see his greatness, his purity, his supreme ideals of conduct, can we then, looking back at the depictions of his sorrow, begin to understand just how emblematic of all human suffering is the book of Job. So he finds no answers from his three companions, and he finishes his long soliloquies at the end of chapter 31 of Job, which is really about 2/3 of the way through the book, and then enters a new character, apparently a younger individual, and he now lectures Job in a way that Job has no answer for. Job is silenced by the answers of this fourth interlocutor, whose name is Elihu ben Barachel. And then, after Elihu's discourses, where he's indeed prepared Job for the very summit, as one of our great commentators, Ramban, states, Elihu brings Job to the level where he's now ready for prophecy. And then God himself speaks to Job after all of these to's and fro's from chapters 38 until chapter 41. Again, some of the greatest flights of Tanakh literature, followed by the conclusion of the story, as we shall be discussing. So in part one, we'll be discussing the answers of the first three friends, companions. Part two, next time, God willing, we shall discuss what Elihu ben Barachel introduces into the discussion, which in some ways, I think, even though his speeches are so very exalted and impenetrable, nevertheless, here we can really see, as we shall be discussing, the key to the answers that are given to Job, that Job accepted. And then finally, in the third session, we will look at this incomparably beautiful and inspiring section at the end, when God himself addresses Job and asks him all these questions, and Job is finally left humbled and accepts that he has received his answer. I've been enraptured by the book of Job for many, many years now. At the beginning, I really could not make head or tail of it. In school and in university, we used to study the plays of William Shakespeare. I studied the Greek poet Homer, the Latin poet Virgil, and other great works of artistry and craftsmanship. And indeed those works to people who just come to them cold without an understanding of the classical languages, the language of Shakespeare, which is nothing like the language of contemporary spoken English. The language itself is a great barrier to understand really what is really being said. And it is important for us as we approach this book of Iyov to appreciate the supreme skill and craftsmanship with which the book is actually constructed. Now, this is simply as a literary masterpiece if we look at it as a human production. But when we go in greater depth into the various commentaries, we see that there are level upon level of allusion in the Hebrew text down to the greatest, the deepest depths of the Kabbalah, with secrets of the transmigration of souls and their incarnations and many, many other secrets embedded in the beautiful, magnificent Hebrew text of Iyov. So clearly we will not be able to get to any great depth in these discussions, rather to look from a more practical point of view of what does the book of Job have to offer us in terms of the answer to these questions that have plagued people for all the generations. And the essential question is, why do people who do good, who have good intentions, whose actions are good, they are righteous, they're in accordance with God's law in the Torah, why do they suffer so much? From illness and persecution and poverty and so many other kinds of suffering, which you can see documented throughout history. Why is it that the righteous suffer? When we look around the world and we see that the people who are manifestly and obviously wicked, they are selfish, they are grabbing wealth, they are grabbing all the resources of the world, people who are living it up in their yachts and in their mansions and in their private jets. These people seem on the surface maybe not to have the same degree of suffering as many other people. That is, of course, open to question and discussion, but this is the central issue of the book of Iyov. And to try to make head or tail of these arguments and discussions, I have found to be quite impossible without reference to all of the classical commentaries on the book of Job, the Hebrew commentaries, and it's on these that I have depended in my studies. First and foremost is the Targum of Yonatan ben Uziel. The Targum is the translation into Aramaic that was written in the first century of the Common Era, in the time of Hillel, whose greatest student was Yonatan ben Uziel. And Yonatan ben Uziel translated the entire Tanakh into Aramaic, not only as a direct word-by-word simple translation, but with many, many additions where he brings out the nuances and the allusions within the written text of the original Hebrew. So this is a most important source for our understanding of many sections of the actual meaning of verses in Job. And second and third come the prince of all the commentators, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, the outstanding commentator on all of Torah, all of Tanakh, all of Talmud. And with Rashi, the exponent of the Pshat, the most simple and clear meaning of the text, that is known as the commentary of Metzudat David, together with Metzudat Zion, which always gives a very clear and simple explanation of the Hebrew text, although much is left to the other commentators to elaborate. So after these commentators, I've also been referring to the commentary of Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, known as Nachmanides, and also to the many, many comments throughout the Talmud on different verses in Job. So today, for the first part of our discussion, I'd like to look in a little more detail at the overall structure of the book and discuss the way that the three companions who come to Job answer him but fail to satisfy him. The book of Job, all in all, is 42 chapters. And the first two chapters set the scene. Many people are familiar with the story. Here was Job, who had a position of tremendous prestige and honor in his society. He had tremendous wealth. He had his sons and his daughters. He had his cattle, his donkeys, his camels. And so happy were his children that they did nothing all the time except party, going from one house to another, from the house of one of the sons to another, spending their days feasting and rejoicing. And then we see that God Almighty summons all the angels. He's interested to know what's going on in the world down there. According to tradition, according to our commentators, this is the day of Rosh Hashanah, the new year. And as among all the angels comes along the accuser, the Satan, and God wants to send him a piece of meat to occupy himself with, and he says, have you paid attention to my servant Job, who serves me in such a pure and honest way? And the Satan says, hey, you've not tried him yet. Until he starts suffering, well, then we'll see if he still believes, then we'll see if he still follows the righteous path. So then the narrative describes how one after the other, all of Job's possessions, his cattle, his donkeys, his camels, are all destroyed one by marauders, and then terrible tragedy, the whirlwind destroys the house in which all of his children are feasting, and all of his wealth is gone, and he starts his process of mourning. And then God says to the Satan, we keep on switching from down here on earth to up there in the heavenly court, and God says to him, well, what about now? You did what you did to Job, and look, he's not cursed God. So the Satan says to God, well, look, all the while that you've not attacked his body, we don't know. A person would be willing to give up anything not to be injured. Even if somebody experiences a blow coming, they put their hand to at least let the blow not touch the face, but at least if it's going to do something, let the hand suffer, but not the face. So God says to the Satan, I'm putting Job in your hands as long as you don't kill him. You can afflict him with every disease that you want. And then we see at the end of this narrative, at the end of the second chapter, Job is sitting on the ground with his body covered with boils, and he's got this shard of pottery which is scraping the horror of his situation. If you really look into the text and imagine it, it's really very gruesome. The kind of thing that they put messages on. This footage is not for everybody, if you really think what he is depicted as suffering. So it's then that his three friends come to visit and console him. According to the very beautiful Midrash, they had various means, although they were living across the great plains and deserts of antiquity, but they had means of finding out what was happening to each other. And through these signals, the three of them come and they see Job sitting on the floor there in his misery, and nobody can open his mouth, watching this tremendous pain and pitiable situation, until finally Job opens his mouth and curses the day that he was born, curses the day that he was conceived, curses the day that the news came that a baby boy has come into the world. Why did he come into this world at all? So after Job's first soliloquy, then the first of the three companions addresses him. Now, all of the interlocutors in the book of Job are considered by our sages to be prophets to the nations. And this is most important because, again, it underlies the universality of this work. And the first of the friends is Eliphaz HaTemani. Eliphaz in Genesis is the son of Esau, Jacob's brother. And there is a hint in the Midrash that Eliphaz actually was quite friendly with Jacob and studied with him. And Eliphaz here comes not as a representative of sinful Edom, but as an outstanding prophet to the nations, a profound sage, a man of stature. And the two other companions, Bildad Hashuchi and Sophar Hanamosi. All of these three considered to be very outstanding figures of antiquity, whether this is an historical account or a literary device. The setting and the details are all absolutely perfect. You can't crack them. So Eliphaz gives his answer to Job, and basically he sets the tone for all of the answers of the three companions. What happens is that Job has made his first soliloquy, his first speech, presenting his plight, and then in comes Eliphaz and answers Job, and then comes Job again, and then comes the second companion Bildad with his soliloquy. Then Job answers. Then comes the third companion Sophar with his soliloquy, and so it is 3 times over. There are 3 rounds of these speeches. The first and second are complete in the sense that Job speaks, Eliphaz, Job, Bildad, Job, Sophar, Job, Eliphaz. It comes around to the second cycle. The third cycle is incomplete because Eliphaz speaks and Job answers him, and then Bildad speaks a very short answer compared to all the others, just a few verses, and that's it. The 3 companions say no more. In other words, there's really 2 2/3 rounds making up the first part of the book of Job, from chapter 3, Job's first soliloquy and the answer of Eliphaz, until finally the 3 companions give up on Job after Bildad's third short speech. Job begins and so far doesn't even bother to answer. So it's this section until chapter 26 of Job, where Job has already given up on the companions have given up on Job, and from chapter 26 onwards, Job is giving his most incredibly beautiful soliloquy of self-justification and of the praise of wisdom and the most incredibly touching evocation of what Job really was. So it's really this section of the book that I want to focus on today, and in the next section we'll discuss in much more detail, God willing, the answers of Elihu ben Barachel, which I think are critical to understanding the whole book. Before, in the third session, we will come to God's answer to Job, and we will discuss what it really means. So, as I said, we have the first 2 chapters set the scene in heaven and the scene on earth. And in fact, throughout the whole book, the only place where the Tetragrammaton appears is in the first chapter of the first 2 chapters of Job, where we're looking at things from the heavenly point of view, and then in the very closing chapters of Job, when God speaks to Job from the whirlwind from chapters 38 to the end of the book. Only in those few chapters there appears the tetragrammaton, the essential name of God. Throughout the rest of the book, the various names of God that appear are, for example, El, or Shaddai, or Eloah, all of which are known from the rest of the Tanakh. But these names were not known to the nations of the world in the way that was revealed to Israel at Sinai. In other words, the absolute unity of God on every level, his omnipresence, his omniscience, his omnipotence, these were not reflected in the names that were known to the ancients besides the Israelites that received Torah from Moses at Sinai, coming in the tradition of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is a very important point, because only by recognizing that Job is not Jewish, he is not an Israelite, he has not received a Torah education, he has not received Emunah, he has not received the training in Emunah which Jewish Torah education seeks to give, and therefore none of the presumptions of a believing Jew or Israelite apply in the case of Job. He's starting blank with a world which is full of mystery, full of suffering, full of contradictions. The wicked are doing beautifully before the flood, before the overturning of Sodom. The wicked were living at the height of luxury and pleasure, and there's no answers. It seems like God has completely abandoned the world. And the greatness of Job is that here is a work within the Torah tradition that dares to answer questions that normally we wouldn't want to express. We'd be afraid to. Well, I'm being irreverent. And indeed, there are grounds for criticism, as Job's companions did not hesitate to point out that what Job is saying could lead to complete atheism. What? You're saying there's no justice in this world? And it really looks that way, doesn't it? So how can we overcome this mystery? We would like to find a just God, a God that is good, a God that rewards righteousness and that punishes wickedness and allows for repentance. And looking at the surface, the way things are, we do not see the storm. This is precisely the complaint of Job that he is willing to voice. So the companions come in after Job's first soliloquy, expressing his pain, his suffering, his turning over and over with an unending series of chastisements. And Eliphaz, with very great beauty and eloquence, worthy of the flights of rhetoric of the best of ancient literature, for this is such a highly structured work. Eliphaz very delicately points out to Job that everybody knows that God is perfectly just, and if a person is suffering, it must be because they are being punished for some sin. This, put very simply and basically, is what Eliphaz and the other companions, Bildad and Zophar, all say to Job again and again. And Job just won't have it. Job says, look, you're completely true. We cannot say that what Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar say in the earlier sections of the book is false. Everything is completely true. That's why we call this the literature of Emet. It's just that what they say misses Job because it does not get to the core of his issue. Yes, it's perfectly true, according to all of our beliefs, according to everything we learn from the Torah, that God rewards righteousness and punishes wickedness. And that we can see, if we have the eyes of faith, we should be able to see that, and Job agrees with this completely, but he says that is not the case for me. Job says, look, yes, it's probably true, the wicked, I agree with that evil, I'm not praising them, but first of all, it's a fact that we see many wicked people that are doing just fine, live with abundance and prosperity, and when they die without a serious illness very quickly, and they're buried, and great funeral and all the rest of it. So where is their suffering? And of course, if you don't have the extra dimension that emunah, that faith gives you, that there is a world of reward, a world of the spirit, that is the reward. But just looking at this world with the same eyes with which Socrates or Aristotle or Spinoza or any of the Descartes looks at the world, there's no evidence of another world unless you really go into the research into the paranormal experiences. But normally, knowledge and feeling that there is a higher world, a world beyond this, is hidden from us. Very few people live with any awareness of all the time, and certainly not Job. And Job is questioning, there seems to be no divine providence over the world. Yes, Job fully understands that the world didn't just get here out of nothing. There is a God who makes the world, but the idea that Job keeps on pushing is that, look, it seems as though the world has gone amok, that there's nobody in control, that there's no providence. The Hebrew word is hashgacha. Hashgacha, from the root of watching and observing, that God may well be in his celestial heights, but down here we do not see this. We see the oppressors oppressing the widows and the orphans and the impoverished and the exploited. And this is brought up again and again in Job. He says, look, you can tell me as much as you like how the wicked are punished, but we see this terrible injustice that meets our eyes. And worst of all for Job, he maintains throughout that he was innocent of any of the sins. Well, now this just enrages Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar. And as the dialogues proceed, the one after the other, these speeches one after the other, they get more and more fierce with Job. In the title of this series, we see an illustration by the English artist William Blake, who was a very horrific kind of artist living back in the days when people really were able to face the very tough aspects of life. And William Blake's pictures of these people furious with Job, the three of them, Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, they tell him, you are a sinner and you are making people sin. You are the worst sinner in the world. Well, perhaps from the point of view of the literary structure of the work, what we're seeing is how they're actually needling Job one by one, each one, and pushing him to even to pouring out his heart even more honestly. This is the greatness of this book, that it confronts our existential ignorance and our existential plight so very honestly, in a way that you'd think that this should be taking place in some kind of non-religious university. And that's the beauty of it. It's a very not religious work. It's a work about morality, a work about ethics, about human vanity and pride more than anything else. But to follow through the to and fro of these discussions between Job, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, we really have no option other than to go to the outstanding commentators if we want to understand exactly what they are saying and what Job is saying. Particularly the commentator Metzudat David, who was a late 18th century commentator in Europe, whose name escapes my mind at this moment, but he has commentary over all of the Nevi'im and Ketuvim, and he has a very, very subtle way of drawing out the meaning of the Hebrew verses, which at times they're very, very difficult to draw out a simple pshat, a simple meaning, but he does so with the most extraordinary skill. And besides this, he also, at the end of every chapter, in his commentary, gives a summary of the argument either of Job himself or of his interlocutors. He summarizes, so this gives us a way better to keep a handle on what is going on in these discussions. But the long and the short of it is that the three companions keep saying to Job, whether you like it or not, you have to admit and confess that the only reason why you are suffering is because you have sinned, and until you repent, you're not going to have any salvation. And again they speak about the overthrow of the wicked and the great future that waits the tzaddik. And again, I'm not going into all of these discussions of this part of the book in detail, because far more important to us today is to understand, as we'll discuss in our next session, what Elihu has to answer. In other words, it is not the arguments of the companions that tell with Job, because he keeps on insisting that he is innocent. Now, we shall see, if you look in the very end of the book, chapter 42, that God Almighty at the conclusion says, look, he says to Eliphaz, you and your companions did not speak correctly in the way that Job did. It's very interesting that there's an ambiguity in those two verses that appear in the last chapter of Job, where twice over God says, you did not speak properly the way my servant Job did. Now, the ambiguity is brought out in the commentators that you could either say they didn't speak properly and Job did, or neither they nor Job did speak properly, but they were worse because Job was suffering worse. They were not, and they should have known better. Either way, we certainly see that God sides with Job at the end, because God says to Eliphaz, you've got to go to Job and ask his forgiveness, and only when he offers sacrifices on your behalf and prays for you will you actually have some release from the guilt that you carry. So clearly the drift is to side with Job, and despite all the negative images which many people have of Job, and in the work he brings this out, he knows that his name is going to be such a watchword for the most horrible, revolting, repulsive suffering. Nevertheless, it is Job who is the real hero of the book. And when we read his self-defense in those chapters from 26 through 31, we see the extraordinary levels of righteousness that he did aspire to. Now, as we'll discuss in our next session, Elihu ben Rachel did point out that Job had certain deficiencies. His main deficiency, very interestingly, according to our commentators, is that although he himself sought the highest level of personal virtue and purity, nevertheless he did not properly protest the wickedness of the people of his time. And because of his failure to protest, that was one of the main reasons why he suffered. Well, this aspect we'll go into in much more detail in the next session, where we discuss the speeches of Elihu ben Barachel. But for the moment, let us understand that Job must be seen not as the three companions saw him as a sinner, but as a man of supreme virtue, because it's only in this way that we can point the question in the proper way. We can sharpen the question. Why should it be that a righteous individual like Job should suffer in this way? How can we answer this without reference to anywhere else in the Torah, without reference to Proverbs, without reference to Kabbalah, without reference to Gilgul, without reference to Olam Haba? How can we answer this? And as we shall see, indeed, between Elihu ben Barachel and between the closing chapters when God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind, we see an entirely higher dimension. But to round up the first section of the book up till chapter 26, when the Chaverim, when the companions give up on Job, to understand why God at the end of the book sides with Job against them is because they have not properly justified the ways of God. And that was precisely what Job wanted, and why Job would not surrender to them and say, okay, I must have sinned. Because Job says to them, yes, the wicked get punished, the righteous are rewarded. But there still remains the question that you have not answered, which is, why does a truly righteous individual suffer? And there are certainly numerous examples of many, many righteous people that have undergone the most tremendous suffering, people that are known and people that are not known, people in illness and day after day. Why? And unless you can answer that question, you cannot have faith in a just God. So Job says to his companions, you are flattering God by saying, because you can't find a real reason why I'm suffering, you say, oh, that guy's suffering so much, he must have sinned. By that you are flattering God, because if it is true that I am righteous, then you've not answered the question. And it's only Elihu ben Barachel who stops this business of the terrible accusations of the three companions. It's only Elihu who really enables us to understand why it should be that Job really suffered, in Elihu ben Barachel's very, very subtle answers to Job. Again, we see the very beautiful literary structure of the work, which is dealing with the fundamental questions of our existence. So with that, we're going to bring to a close our first discussion in the series of Answering Job. And in the coming two sessions, we will hopefully also find answers that will be somewhat satisfying. Shalom.